What's up, fam? And welcome back to the podcast. I've been away for a while, but we've started 2024 in a new way. We've offered up a couple of episodes to some of our listeners, some of our family out there. And this is that first part of that episode of 2024. And a wonderful thing is going to happen here. A little bit of education, a little bit of what's going on in the world. And as we say, a little bit to connect you with whatever is going on out there. On this episode, fam, I want to introduce Carmelita, and we're going to talk about something very serious. It's not our usual young adult and youth ministry topics. We're going to talk about something that's happening south of the border and which for me doesn't get spoken of enough. And we're going to talk about why that is, and we're going to talk about the situation that's going on in Nicaragua. So I'm going to allow Carmelita, and that's her name that she uses, and she'll explain to you why. I'm going to allow Carmelita to share her information and her story about what's going on and what her mission is regarding the things going on in Nicaragua. So, also, a couple of things. We will not be showing her face on this episode, and she'll also explain that to you. So, without further ado, welcome to the podcast. Ready? Here we go.
Different points of view and highs and lows. A new perspective everywhere you go. Open up your mind, drown out the noise, and see if this connected. And see if this connected.
Carmelita.
Well, thanks so much, Arnell. Hello, everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to take over this connected podcast today. And I'm especially grateful to you, Arnell, for the invitation. As he said, my name is Carmelita. I'm the brains behind the Carmelite Quotes social media presence, the blog, the social media accounts. Anywhere you go on social media and you enter Carmelite Quotes, you're going to find my account. We're not on TikTok. We don't do TikTok. But I have been an activist, an advocate, a translator, and a prayer partner on behalf of the persecuted church in Nicaragua since April 2018. And as I explained to Arnell, I am a secular Carmelite. I come from the Washington province here in the U.S. And since 2018, I've been assisting our Discalced Carmelite Auxiliary Bishop in the Managua Archdiocese of Nicaragua. His name is Bishop Silvio Jose Baez. And I provide him with translation support, moral support, and whatever else he may need to engage in his ministry. So today's discussion is going to take us into the heart of this deeply concerning crisis in Nicaragua, the violation of human rights, crimes against humanity, and particularly the attacks on religious freedom in Nicaragua. And this is a narrative that began with student protests on April 19, 2018, and since then it's evolved into a troubling series of events that, we just cannot afford to overlook. So let's rewind to the early days of these 2018 protests. The date of April 19 is literally etched into the memory of every Nicaraguan, whether they support the regime of Daniel Ortega and his wife, Vice President, Queen Consort, Rosario Murillo, or whether we're talking about the people who oppose this dictatorship. You know, the Ortega government announced drastic changes to the Social Security program in the country at that time. And when a similar protest occurred in 2013, it was students who came to the defense of the senior citizens whose lives would be impacted by the change in the Social Security law. So when in April 2018, the change in the security law occurred again, became more austere, students once again decided that they were going to take to the streets and peacefully protest. The problem was they were met with brute force and vicious violence. There were shock troops in the streets firing live rounds on the students. Arnell is sharing images from those protests. The national flag of Nicaragua, if you've happened to notice what goes on in the country, the national flag of Nicaragua is blue and white, azul y blanco. And if you happen to see the Miss Universe competition, you saw Miss Nicaragua wearing blue and white several times throughout the competition, especially on the last night. Well, the student protests continued. The students protested peacefully. That was their intention. That was their plan. However, when the police and the paramilitary fired on these students, they had to seek refuge somewhere, so they went to the churches. These are students who participated in the life of the local church, and they sought refuge, for instance, in the cathedral in Managua. It was a desperate attempt to find safety amid all this unrest and the live fire of the police and paramilitary. And you know, the bishops, the priests, even the cardinal in Managua stood by them. And especially there in the Managua Cathedral, there are famous photos of the bishops standing and the priests standing with the students. And it was the auxiliary bishop, of Managua, Bishop Rolando Jose Alvarez, who said, these students are the moral reserve of our country. But that angered, from that moment, the dictatorship. And although they were opposed to the Catholic Church prior to that time, they really let it all out and started firing, as we say, with both barrels. You know, this initial act of seeking sanctuary, here are a couple of examples of what happened. There was an altar server in León, Nicaragua. He served in the cathedral. There are photos of this server with the cathedral. His SoundCloud playlist still exists on SoundCloud because he was assassinated during the first days of these peaceful protests. And the photos of this server, Sandor Dolmus, in his casket, at his funeral, his mother crying over his body, weeping uncontrollably, his body being laid in the grave. These are images that no one has forgotten. And it really marked a somber milestone, you know, in the challenges faced by the church. And as the protests unfolded in May, especially May 30th, there was an annual march. They always had marches, processions for Mother's Day, May 30th in Nicaragua. However, on that day, there were sharpshooters, snipers, who were positioned at the baseball stadium, at different places all along the route of the march. And even though there were tens of thousands of protesters who came from all over the country to participate in this march in Managua, those disturbing attacks unfolded. Bianca Jagger, the great human rights defender who is a native of Nicaragua, she was there. She saw the people who were being shot before her eyes. She escaped by God's grace. And so all of this serves as a stark reminder of the dangers faced by those who are standing up for justice and freedom. You know, in July, on July 9 of 2018, Bishop Baez, Cardinal Brenes, the Apostolic Nuncio, and a group of priests, they went to Diriamba, to this basilica. Why? To attempt to seek the release of volunteers who were trapped inside the cathedral, because the cathedral was surrounded, the basilica was surrounded by a horde, literally, of Sandinista fervents. And so during that particular trip to St. Sebastian Basilica in Diriamba, the crowd attacked the cardinal, Bishop Baez, the apostolic nuncio, the priests, and Bishop Baez was injured. The cardinal was roughed up. It was an ugly, ugly incident. Let's talk about what else happened in July, just about a week later. There were student protesters at the university called UNAN, UNAN, in Managua. And there was a reporter from the Washington Post, Joshua Partlow, who was embedded with those students. And what happened was that when the police began to fire on the students and the reporter, Joshua Partlow, they sought refuge once again in a church, because the university parish was within running distance. They ran to Divine Mercy Church. The pastor, Father Zamora, and the associate pastor, Father Cole, welcomed the students in. They sought shelter in the rectory, and everybody had to dive on the floor, because for 15 hours, police and paramilitary fired on the building. And the priest, Father Zamora, told the students, get down, because any bullet that comes through those windows is going to hit you. The tabernacle was damaged, and there's lots of damage in the church that Father Zamora and the parish leadership have decided never, never to erase. Those marks of the assault still remain. And if you want to read the article, and you have access to the Washington Post, the name of the article is "They Are Shooting at a Church." Joshua Partlow, Washington Post. Let's fast forward to the assassination plot. In the summer of 2018, there was a credible threat that the State Department relayed not only to U.S. Ambassador Laura Dogu, but also to Bishop Silvio Jose Baez, that the government, the regime, the dictatorship itself had developed an assassination plot to kill the U.S. ambassador and to kill Bishop Baez. Now, the revelation was kept under wraps for months, but Bishop Baez had to make a decision. Do I stay here in my comfortable little seminary community where I live? Or do I go on out to the parishes and celebrate Mass and preside at the sacraments of confirmation? And so he decided that he was going to have to wear a bulletproof vest to go celebrate Mass. Now, to add to this distressing narrative, Pope Francis decided that he was going to relocate Bishop Baez to Rome. He told Bishop Baez, I need you here with me. But the bottom line decision was, I don't need another martyred bishop in Central America. And furthermore, this decision really underscored the Vatican's concern for the escalating crisis in Nicaragua. Now, adding to this, there was a priest at Managua Cathedral who was hearing confessions one day. That's in 2019. And during the confession, the person, the penitent, who really wasn't that penitent, threw acid in his face. The priest was severely injured, and it was just an absolutely shocking act of violence against a priest at the Managua Cathedral, well loved, and an act of violence that took place within the church itself. So let's take a look at what happened a bit later in 2019. There was a mob that attacked priests, nuns, and worshipers inside the Managua Cathedral. And then in 2020, in the summer of 2020, the cathedral itself, the Sangre de Cristo Chapel, became the scene of a terrorist firebomb attack. It desecrated the chapel, and it just absolutely charred and scorched the crucifix in that chapel, well beloved by the people for centuries. Let's fast forward again to August 2022. And this is very famous. This is when the US and world press really started to take note of what was happening and pay attention. In August of 2022, the Curia building for the Diocese of Matagalpa in the north central section of the country was under siege. The police swooped in. They trapped Bishop Rolando Jose Alvarez, a few of his priests, a deacon, a lay communications worker, and a couple of seminarians were trapped in there for days. And there was one photo that emerged that you may have seen. The photographer captured Bishop Alvarez kneeling on the sidewalk, his hands lifted in prayer, while police stood around him in this tense standoff. There's the photo right now of Bishop Alvarez. No, he's not holding up his hands to say, I surrender. His chief communications officer told me that's just what the bishop looks like when he's on his knees in prayer. Isn't that powerful? And so this great bishop, what a valiant man of God. He stayed with his priests inside the Curia building. That's where his residence happens to be located. And it was in the early hours of the morning of August 19, 2022, that the police swooped in the middle of the night to abduct Bishop Alvarez and his companions who were holed up in that building. The priests, the companions, were taken to El Chipote prison. It's a notorious torture chamber where enemies of the regime, political prisoners, are held. Bishop Alvarez was held under house arrest in an undisclosed location. But on February 9 last year, the regime decided that they were going to expel 222 and more of these prisoners from El Chipote and other facilities and send them to Washington, D.C. It was a deal worked out in secret with the U.S. State Department. However, we've been told that at the gate on the tarmac, Bishop Alvarez was handed a blank piece of paper and told to sign. Sign this blank piece of paper, you'll be able to leave. Number one, Bishop Alvarez is a man under authority. He answers to Pope Francis, not the police. He answers to Pope Francis, not the dictator. And when he refused to sign and thus refused to get on the plane, that absolutely infuriated Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. So immediately, express, no due process. The bishop was taken from the airport to a hellhole of a maximum security isolation cell called Little Hell in La Modelo prison, which is reputed to be one of the worst in Central America. And he was sentenced in this express trial, convicted and sentenced to over 26 years in La Modelo prison. Simultaneously, the missionaries of charity, the sisters of Mother Teresa, they had been ministering for decades in Nicaragua, but they were suddenly expelled, and it disrupted their efforts to provide charity and aid to the Nicaraguan people. You know, Nicaragua is known to be the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti. There's tremendous need in Nicaragua. And the missionaries of charity, the 222 prisoners of conscience, Bishop Alvarez himself, they were all, any Nicaraguan citizens were stripped of their citizenship. And Bishop Alvarez's decision not to join the 222 led to this harsh sentence. And you know, the crisis extended not only to Mother Teresa's missionaries, it also extended to other religious congregations, Dominican sisters, the Trappistine nuns lost their ability to serve in the country. They were expelled from the country. Priests were denied re-entry. The monastery of the Trappistine nuns has become some kind of veterinary center. They probably have animals housed in the chapel. That's just how cynical this dictatorship is. And not only have the religious congregations been expelled, also Catholic universities have been closed and their property seized throughout the country. The most famous example, the Jesuit University in Managua, which for decades has been the most famous and best university in the country and also in Central America. So when the Jesuits were expelled and the university property seized, that left an even greater void in quality education, also in terms of formation of the youth and young adults. Imagine that you're enrolled in the university and within 24 hours, your records are erased. Your credits are gone. It's an absolutely unthinkable situation, and students all over the country have been concerned, enraged, outraged, and many have had to flee the country. They've been offered scholarships at other Jesuit universities, like Georgetown in the United States. There are Jesuit universities in California and on the West Coast who have taken them in. And so we're grateful to the Jesuits for making a quality education available to these students from Nicaragua. You know, not quite a year ago, on the anniversary of Pope Francis's election on March 13, 2023, for the 10th anniversary, the media outlet Infobae in Buenos Aires interviewed Pope Francis. It was a televised interview. And one of the final questions from the interviewer to Pope Francis was to ask him to comment on the tragedy in Nicaragua. And Pope Francis had a very interesting comment to make. First, he referred to Ortega as being imbalanced. And he's talking about a psychological imbalance. And he also compared Ortega's dictatorship to communist Russia at the beginning of the 20th century and to Hitler's dictatorship, the Third Reich, that killed millions, not just Jews, but also so many Catholic martyrs. Carmelites were martyred. Franciscans were martyred. And on and on and on. So Pope Francis has a lot to say about what's happened in Nicaragua, but he has not seen it necessary to make a statement about Nicaragua every single day of the week. You know, the most recent attack has been this. Just before Christmas, on December 20, the Bishop of Ciuna Diocese, Bishop Isidoro Mora, was captured as he was en route to celebrate confirmations in a parish. He had 2 seminarians with him. And Bishop Mora and the seminarians were abducted as they were en route to this confirmation mass. In the days that followed, more than a dozen priests and seminarians have been abducted, and we use the term abduct for a reason. Their whereabouts are unknown. They are victims of enforced disappearance. The dictatorship probably knows where they are, but the dictatorship is not speaking at all. And so this enforced disappearance of the bishop, now a second bishop who's being held, and the enforced disappearance of those priests, the last count I saw before we began to tape this episode, there were 16 priests, but another seminarian was taken, so that number may be up to 17 now. It's another layer of concern to add to this already dire situation. And when you think that it can't get any worse, Ortega and Murillo come up with a new plan. The bottom line is that Ortega and Murillo want to eliminate the Catholic Church from Nicaragua. And they are doing everything within their power to make certain that happens. Denying the faithful the sacraments, denying seminarians the opportunity to be ordained, and denying the very religious freedom of the country. And it's not just Catholics who've been affected by this. They have abducted is the correct term to use. They have abducted leadership from a major evangelical movement in the country, Mountain Gateway movement. It's a missionary movement, and they have already imprisoned 11 members of the leadership in Nicaragua and have, quote unquote, warrants out for the arrest of 3 leaders in the USA. So the crisis of religious freedom in Nicaragua is unthinkable. And I will go ahead and close my comments there. That gives you an overview of what's happened since 2018. Arnell, what questions do you have?
Carmelita, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The the thing that ultimately concerns me immediately is that, in our social media, in our media, in our local um, news, we really don't hear much about what's going on in Nicaragua. And why do you feel that that is?
Well, when you're talking about Central America, we've all heard the term banana republic,
Mhm.
and we're not talking about clothes. I think part of the problem is the fact that Nicaragua, since it's a small nation, Nicaragua, because of the fact that it's a poor nation, it's not a story that is going to attract a lot of clicks, a lot of likes, a lot of shares, and especially it's not going to attract advertising dollars. So I think economics is one of the principal reasons why the mainstream media covers the story. Every once in a while, you'll see a conservative media outlet like Breitbart cover what's happening in Nicaragua. Every once in a while. The Reuters News Service and Associated Press are the best sources for non-Catholic news about Nicaragua. In terms of Catholic reporting from Nicaragua, there's no Catholic reporter left in Nicaragua, independent Catholic reporting. They've all had to flee the country. The Associated Press reporter had to leave the country. The Reuters reporter had to leave the country. The photographer who was feeding photos, news photos, to AFP, Agence France Presse, to AP, to Reuters, he had to leave the country. And he's now a translator somewhere in Iowa. It's a tremendous crisis to try to get accurate information to the Nicaraguan people, and it's an even greater crisis to get information to U.S. citizens.
Hmm. Now, Carmelita, you had said that the regime over there wants to eliminate the Catholic Church, uh, and when we look at the number of Catholics, the population of Catholics in Nicaragua, it's less than 50%, which somewhat always amazes me that you always think of Latin American countries as predominantly or significantly higher numbers of Catholics. Um, but it's less than 50%, and it's shrinking. Now, uh, do you know if the current regime, if they are people of faith or they've just lost their faith? Are you set,
Um,
Melita?
well, let's put it this way. Hello, Arnell.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask.
Arnell, I'm seeing black. Okay.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Screen. My inner.
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I think we're having
Um,
a little bit of technical difficulties on our line. Are you able to hear me? Let me see if I can contact you on
uh, Arnell, do you have my contact information
I do.
on WhatsApp?
Let me try to reach you. We're still recording
We're still live.
we're still live. We're still going.
We're still live with our technical difficulties.
Yeah, we had just been talking earlier about how some of your social medias have been hacked. And so maybe this is one of those. Can you hear me now?
Not only hacked, I was doxxed on Twitter in
On
2018.
Twitter. So on this note, as we have here, you know, one of the things that you'd said that, when you can't go on the screen because you're, you've been actually literally being threatened for speaking out.
That's right. I had to contact the FBI twice
Hmm.
in 2018
And that was for speaking out against the regime.
for defending Bishop Baez and for defending truth and freedom and religious liberty in Nicaragua.
Oh, that's a scary moment when
Wait,
you go ahead. We seem to have lost you again.
yeah, we're freezing again. I'm trying.
Let's see. Let's see what's going on here.
I'm using my PC right now, and it's a zippy dippy PC. I could switch to my handheld.
Yeah, let's see about that. Let's just get your voice in.
Okay,
All right.
let's see. Shall I start a Zoom session on my handheld?
I can hear you now. You're doing pretty good now. Let's see.
I've still got my headset on and I'm still connected to the PC.
Yeah. We're doing well now. But you can't hear
Okay,
me. Okay.
you from time to time the Zoom screen freezes and the bars next to your name turn red. And I have top of the line internet here, so I'm confused as to why the big bucks that I'm paying to Spectrum are suddenly not giving me the Spectrum I need.
We
Like
are
I
not
said,
sponsored by Spectrum, that for sure. And I also have Spectrum. Uh, but on while I have you here, you know,
yes.
the things with the regime, the current regime,
Mhm.
they were the Sandinistas, correct?
Correct. And they are not communists. They are
They're
not communists or Marxists, strictly speaking.
hmm
Sandinismo, as they say, is an ideology in and unto itself, where the government has a socialist lean,
hmm
but the socialist countries club, not country club, countries club, the leaders of socialist nations kicked Ortega out of the club
hmm
and because of all of the human rights abuses.
yeah.
So Sandinismo is more like North Korea. They have expelled the Red Cross. They're trying to kill the Catholic Church. Um, they allow no independent observers in the nation. And the funny thing about Sandinismo is that at the same time it's shutting down the public spaces,
hmm
it loves the money
yeah.
from the USA. You know, you go to any cigar shop and you're going to see Nicaraguan cigars just lined up
hmm
in the display area. Um, so sugar, garment industry, tobacco industry, coffee industry. Ask your local barista, do you source your coffee beans from Nicaragua?
Yeah. So
Look at the
question.
labels in your clothes and
Yeah.
does it say hecho in Nicaragua?
Yeah. So question is when did when did the good guys became the bad guys? When did the good things When did
Okay,
it started to go bad?
good question. In 1979, Ortega and other Sandinista guerrillas overthrew the dictatorship of Tachito Somoza, who inherited the dictatorship from his father, Anastasio Somoza. And the Somoza Empire was overthrown in 1979. And Ortega came to power as the leader of the country in those revolutionary times. Now, the USA was not really on board with the Sandinistas, and some of the older listeners may recall the Contra rebellion.
Yeah. Iran Contra.
Exactly, Oliver North, et cetera, and so forth. And that was the attempt by the US administration to steer the events in Nicaragua a certain way. It didn't work. And so consequently, there was one positive leader between 1979 and 2007, and that was the early election in, I believe it was 1991, and Doña Violeta Chamorro, the widow of an assassinated newspaper editor, she led the country for a while, and it was wonderful. There was peace, there was freedom. But in 2007, Ortega came back into the presidential palace called El Carmen, and he made the decision that he was never going to leave.
Wow.
And now people say Ortega, Somoza, it's all the misma cosa. It's all the same thing. And they say that today Ortega is 1,000 times worse than Somoza ever was. Somoza never kicked out the Catholic Church. Somoza never expelled priests. Somoza never expelled the Red Cross.
So would you say this is just another, it's just greed again?
Greed, thirst for power,
Greed.
and fear. Fear. Fear is probably the greatest factor that drives dictators to engage in the human rights abuses that are so prevalent in their regimes, because the dictator is afraid to face the people. The dictator is afraid to leave power. The dictator is afraid of what could happen to him and her in the case of Nicaragua, because at Christmas time last year, a year ago, Ortega said, well, my vice president here, they call her La Compañera, Rosario Murillo, she's really the co-president.
Mm-hmm. You know what amazes me here, Carmelita, is again, as in any developing nation, someone who comes out as the leader and kind of like the savior and comes out very well, helps, and then gets this thirst for power and hunger and doesn't want to let go.
Well, you've heard the old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
This is a prime example.
I'm just curious of if you have any thoughts, or if the church or the bishops that you translate for have any ideas and concepts of how to resolve such things, because it's prevalent in the world. You see it all the time. The only times again that Nicaragua gets on the news is if something awful happens, and that's the same thing in all of the world. All our clicks are because something disastrous happened.
Sure. Make a note to yourself. Before we had our technical difficulties, I wanted to circle back to your question about the religious attitudes and practices of the ruling couple. But do the bishops see any hope? The bishop I translate for, Bishop Silvio Jose Baez says, often, no night lasts forever. No night lasts forever. And he also reminds his flock as he preaches every Sunday from St. Agatha Church in Miami, with the permission and the encouragement of Pope Francis. He has been spending his exile in Miami with the Nicaraguan community of exiles there. And every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, Bishop Baez presides at the Spanish-speaking Mass. And you will hear him say that the night that Nicaragua is going through right now is going to end, that this crucified people will rise again. Don't hide. Take care of yourselves, but that doesn't mean shut up. That doesn't mean quit denouncing human rights abuses, quit denouncing abuses of religious freedom. It does mean take care of yourself. Carry a burner phone. Don't leave a lot of traces. Use a VPN. Don't leave a lot of stuff on your phone that can be used against you in the kangaroo courts.
Mm-hmm. Did I lose you again? Carmelita?
No, I went to mute so I could cough.
Okay.
But he seriously states one more thing. There's a famous phrase in Nicaragua that says, solo el pueblo salva el pueblo, which means only the people can save the people. It's like Daniel Comboni, Saint Daniel Comboni, when he went to the missions in Africa, in Khartoum, he said, save Africa with Africa.
Exactly.
And so it's the same thing here. Now, circling back to the question about the religious proclivities of the ruling couple, let's think about this for a moment. Daniel Ortega, not long after 2007, cozied up to the cardinal in Managua. And he made a pact, as it were, with Cardinal Obando that Ortega's government would completely criminally outlaw abortion. And of course, the Catholic Church was pleased. However, the practices of the ruling couple have strayed far from the Catholic faith that they state they profess. Do they go to Mass? No. Do they frequent the sacraments? No. Does anyone go to them to celebrate Mass? Not that we know of. Could they receive in good conscience anyway? No. What does happen is that on street corners, believe it or not, around the country, there are shrines to Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo with elaborate floral offerings. And you would think that it's like rendering homage to Caesar. It's really strange. And the ruling couple, they have no more use for priests, bishops, whatever, even evangelicals. They have had some evangelicals to appear at events with them, but even those evangelical leaders have been kicked out of the country or not permitted back in. So these are some serious situations that we have to deal with Ortega and Murillo, where they have their own cult, as it were, the cult of Ortega Murillo, where they're shutting down religious freedom for Catholics and evangelicals. And furthermore, that they are not only shutting down the church, shutting down popular processions, they are taking over these events. The nation of Nicaragua is fiercely Marian.
Mm-hmm.
And every year, getting ready for the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, there is a popular religious celebration on the vigil of the Immaculate Conception. It's called the Griteria, and that literally means shouting. And what happens is that it's the custom, the tradition all over the country for people in their homes to set up elaborate altars for their statues of the Immaculate Virgin and the Immaculate Conception is such a huge festivity. Well, when you're making a decision that you have to shut down religious processions for saints' days in particular parishes, because people are accustomed, as you'll see all over Latin America, to take a statue on a platform and to parade it through the streets of the town with a band, with flowers, with all kinds of festivity. Ortega and Murillo decided that they had to shut down those processions. Then they realized that they had to shut down Holy Week processions because you can't have an outdoor Stations of the Cross.
Mm-hmm.
Then they shut down the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then I said to my friends in August, I said, what do you think they're going to do when it's time for the Griteria? Are they going to shut down those processions too? Are they going to forbid people to pray the rosary in public? That's what happened. But furthermore, the Ortega Murillo dictatorship decided that they were going to take over the celebration and they were going to have contests in different towns as to who has the best Marian altar. But Marian with an Ortega Murillo flavor, because it was only sanctioned altars who were presented in this display area, and it's just so cynical. It's crazy.
Seems like it. You know, Carmelita, the things that are going on there, obviously it's not a free democracy. There's no elections. And if there were elections, then probably the the current regime are guaranteed to win.
That's right.
So what's going on with the people in Nicaragua? What what what's their plight with mass? Are homilies checked on, or uh
Yes.
so they have to get permission? And
No, there are spies in every parish,
okay. So,
government spies who, you know, they take notes, they record, they take photos,
so
and
that has that caused the faithful to not attend mass? I mean, we're in the United States where you're free to worship and you see empty churches. You see in Europe empty churches where there's freedom to worship. Has it become where in Nicaragua the people over there are the churches becoming empty because of fear, or do they remain the same because people and their faith continues to be strong?
the churches whose pastors have just been abducted, some of those churches are actually closed
Wow.
because what do you they don't know about how to celebrate a Sunday in the absence of a priest because they've had priests for so long.
Hmm.
Can the can the cardinal in Managua get information out to churches all around the country or to his ecclesiastical province. This is how you celebrate a Sunday in the absence of a priest.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you have a catechist take over when a priest cannot come to you. But we've had reports that the churches just weren't even opened because Father wasn't there. We've had reports that there are, since this past wave of abductions, that some churches have had people staying home. Why? Because they don't have a level of faith and courage that impels them to go to Mass anyway, no matter who is spying on who.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of fear right now.
Rightly so. And it's a lot to ask. It's to put yourself out there.
Once upon a time, there was a popular statement that said, if it was a crime to be a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Well, in Nicaragua, it's a crime, virtually, to be a Catholic. And the question that we can ask ourselves here in the United States or around the world where religious freedom exists, could I go ahead and go to Mass if I knew someone was taking my photo, recording my presence, and how much attention I paid during the homily, or how fervently I participated in the Mass? Could I have the courage to go to Mass anyway and receive the sacraments? It's a tough question, and it's one that we should ask ourselves, because the people, the faithful in Nicaragua, need our advocacy, they need our prayers, they need our sacrifice, and that's the one thing that Bishop Baez has insisted upon. Don't forget us.
Exactly. That leaves me with this question. For our listeners, who are youth, young adults, their parents, what are people to do? On this end, and those people who are listening, what are we to do?
Here are some concrete suggestions. First, pray. Bishop Baez has asked people to pray the Rosary, to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and if you've got the fervor to do all of the above on this list, please go ahead and do it. To pray the St. Michael prayer, especially the St. Michael prayer, please, Lord. To go to Eucharistic adoration, because Bishop Baez says, if you fill your heart and your mind with thoughts of God, no other thought will be able to enter. And so he wants us to focus in our prayer on God, and to let that be, if anybody has been to Cursillo movement, a lever, a palanca, a lever that helps to support the church in Nicaragua. We can be the people who lift up Moses's arms and keep him standing in prayer. We can be the support that helps the prayer of the people, the faithful in Nicaragua. So prayer is so important. Number 2, why not set up a news alert in your favorite news gathering organization, whether it's going to Google News Alerts and starting an alert in English for Rolando Alvarez, or starting an alert in English for Nicaragua, or starting an alert in English for however you want. You can follow me on X. That's where, formerly known as Twitter, my Nicaragua presence is most felt. That's where I'm sharing news articles, because that's where the majority of Nicaraguans are following, who are part of the opposition. Also, not only can you follow Carmelite Quotes wherever you want to follow Carmelite Quotes, you can also share those news articles that you gather. Search for news articles regarding Nicaragua. Search for news articles regarding Catholic Church, Nicaragua. Search for news articles regarding Bishop Rolando Alvarez. And you're going to find articles in a variety of languages because I have those Google News alerts set up for myself to come in as they hit the fan. And there's a lot that's hitting the fan these days, from Asia to Western Europe and all over the Western Hemisphere. Next, advocacy. Can you write a letter? Can you send an email? For listeners in the USA, do you know who your representative is in Congress? Do you know who your senator is? Go to their website. Use the contact form. Send a message and said, I just heard about the crisis in Nicaragua. What are you doing to help advocate for freedom in Nicaragua? And I'll tell you something, it's not a Democrat versus Republican issue. When the NICA Act passed Congress a few years back, it was unanimous. It was a unanimous vote. So don't be worried about whether you have an independent, a Republican, or a Democratic legislator in Congress, in Senate. They're concerned. Everybody's concerned. So advocate, write a letter, send an email, tell your friends. Have you heard about what's going on in Nicaragua? I'm going to go out on a limb here. Contact your bishop. Contact your diocesan liturgy office and ask, what are you doing to help the bishops in Nicaragua who are in prison and disappeared? Can we in our parishes have an intention to pray for these bishops, to pray for these parishes in Nicaragua, to pray for the priests that are in prison, the priests that are disappeared? Maybe that's going out on a limb, but I'm willing to go out on a limb. I think that's super important. And that's one thing that Bishop Baez most recently has insisted, that the church around the world, bishops around the world, can let their people know that they need to pray for two bishops who are imprisoned, detained, disappeared in Nicaragua. Because if the bishops don't tell the people what's going on, how will they know?
That's a lot, Carmelita.
It's not enough,
That's
you know.
that's a lot that's going on, and
Yeah,
deeply, deeply disturbing. And many a times when we live our faith in places where there is religious freedom, we neglect the fact that the rest of the world does not have the same luxury as we do.
no, they
And
don't.
and I want to thank you for bringing that to light in this new year, where we all come about and say what our New Year's resolution is. Maybe one of our New Year's resolution this year is to be intentional in praying, and as you said, advocating for those people, especially the people in Nicaragua who don't experience the same freedoms as we do.
That's true.
Um, so that will be one of my intentional um, resolutions this year is to keep this in mind, that our freedom is only as strong as those people who don't who struggle to and strive to have that same religious freedom.
That's right.
Um, and maybe, fam, our listeners out there, that each time that you might be considering, I don't want to go to mass, it's boring. Maybe you want to think about those people who actually fear having to go to, actually fear going to mass, and yet they do, because they believe that what strengthens them is the sacraments. Um, my word for this year is humble, is humbled. And I am humbled by this episode. I'm humbled by your dedication to this cause, Carmelita, the courage that you must have, and the people who you're with, the fortitude that comes from the Holy Spirit that goes through you to just continue. Um, I'm so glad that you came on. I'm so glad that you came on, uh, to share, uh, on this takeover.
Thanks so much. It's really, I'm gratified to have the opportunity, because I've been following you on Instagram, and when I saw your little message about takeover, I thought, who wants to take over a podcast? I'm willing to take over anybody's podcast, but had no idea what it was that you meant.
Yeah,
And I was just thrilled to have this opportunity. Thank you so much for providing me a platform, especially since I can't access my own platform right now.
right.
And so it means a lot. It means a lot.
Exactly. And Carmelita, we ask everyone to keep you in prayer, and we ask everyone to follow you on Carmelita Quotes, on
Nope, nope.
all
Carmelite Quotes.
Carmelite Quotes.
C
Carmelite
A
Quotes.
R M E L I T E Q U O T E S. Carmelite Quotes, all lowercase, all squished together.
Carmelite Quotes on Instagram, on X, formerly Twitter, and your podcast, that you actually just started because of the situation.
Right.
What's that one called on Spotify?
On Spotify, it's Free the Bishops.
Free the
Free
Bit.
the Bishops podcast. And the episodes are still there. I
Yeah.
just can't log in to record a new episode.
She's been hacked, she's been blocked. And so we're so glad to give you this opportunity to take over, to get the word out there, because as I said, we hardly see information that's happening out there, because of our feed is either twisted, or people choose what we need to see. So, um, fam, we want you to go and search up Nicaragua, the crisis in Nicaragua, religious freedoms, um, and get it out there. And as Carmelita said, pray the Rosary, Divine Mercy Chaplet, Saint Michael's Prayer, you know, advocacy, advocate, contact your council person, your assembly person, your senator, uh, contact them, write them letters, and as she said here, let's contact our bishops and ask them, to also put that out there, and maybe get all our parishes to make those universal prayer intentions and include Nicaragua, uh, along with all the other things that's going on in the world. This is just south of our border. This is our neighbor, uh, and we need to get it out there. You need to pray.
Amen. And
Um,
anytime you want to talk about Nicaragua in another episode,
mhm.
send me a message, because now that we've got it out there, I can give you an update at any time,
Will do.
and I would be pleased to.
And at those times, maybe even we'll do a few of those updates throughout the year of what's going on, and we'll look forward to that.
Praise God.
Yeah. So, Carmelita, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing the wealth of information about the crisis that's going on there. We pray that there will be resolution, immediately that comes down there. We pray to Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception for her intercession, that she guide the people in Nicaragua, that she heals the wounds that are there. We pray that she enlightens these regimes to step aside and let the people um, feel the freedom that is given to us by God. Um, we ask for healing. We ask for the freedom to worship, uh, and we ask for ourselves to forgive, to forgive.
Mhm.
And so, on that note, again, thank you, Carmelita from Carmelite Quotes, for coming on the podcast, for taking over this episode. Fam, if you're out there and you want to support, seek her out, Carmelite Quotes. Follow her on all her social media. Uh, Support what's going on in Nicaragua during the crisis. If you want to contact us with any comments, concerns, uh, you can send us an email at catholic.dad50@gmail.com. You can also DM us on our Instagram, catholic.dad. As usual, um, if you have anything that you want to share with us, if you want to take over the podcast, if you want to come on the podcast, just contact us there. Send us a DM. That's the fastest and easiest way. And as usual, um, humbly, we ask you to pray for us as we always will pray for you. And as always, be blessed and be third. And we'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye. And we will stop recording.